This episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Oshala Farm. They grow and sell over 80 medicinal plant species that they grow on their beautiful and vibrant certified organic farm based in Southern Oregon. So if you're looking to purchase organic herbs grown right here in the United States, definitely check out Oshala Farm at oshalafarm.com. They also sell things like elixirs, fire cider, body care products, etc. That's oshalafarm.com. And big thanks to them for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. What's up, Herbalists? This is Mason, and you're listening to Herb Rally. Today's episode is yet another edition of the Herbalist Hour, and this time I'm joined by herbalist Lise Wolff. So Amanda and I, we went to Minneapolis a month or so ago, and we visited 3 different herbalists, and Lise was the third and final interview that we did on that trip. You've already heard the other 2 interviews at this point. That was Ashley Ellenboss from Skyhouse Herbs, along with Jody McKee from Jewelweed Health Shop. So it was really great and encouraging to find out that Minnesota has such a vibrant and thriving herbal scene, and it was also really nice to meet Lise, as I've heard of her work for many a year now, but this was our first time hanging out. This was recorded at her home, where she runs her clinical herbal practice. She actually had a client after the interview, so this was kind of on the shorter end of the Herbalist Hour interviews, but nonetheless, fantastic interview. We chat about her early childhood years and what brought her into the herbalism world, which is a great story. Some of her herbal mentors and how they shaped her herbal practices and techniques today. So Lise has a deep appreciation for local neighborhood plant walks, inspires you to use what you have around you, encourages you to sit and listen to your body, and she truly cares about each and every one of her students. You can learn more about Lise and her work at Herbalist Lise Wolff, that's Wolf with 2 F's.com. herbalistlisewolff.com. Also, before we get into the show, I'd love to read a Apple Podcast 5-star written review. This one was from A.K. Wardman, one of our listeners from Great Britain, and they say, "Fabulous herbal podcast listener from the UK. 5 stars. Such an interesting, informative podcast for all your herbal interests. Mason has such a wonderful range of interesting individuals that transcends across the whole herbal community to suit everyone from the very experienced to those just beginning their plant path. I listen every week from the UK whilst working in people's gardens, as it really helps me to maintain motivation to keep studying once I'm home after a long day in the garden." So thank you, AK, for the very positive and delightful review. I always say it makes my day when I read these, and it really does. Like, when I sit down and I read these on Apple Podcasts, and I just brings a smile to my face and helps keep me motivated to keep doing these interviews. And it's listeners like you that really keep me inspired and motivated to continue to produce the Herb Rally podcast and do more interviews too. I've been having a lot of fun with the interviews, so hopefully y'all are digging these on the Herbalist Hour on the Herb Rally podcast feed. If you, dear listener, are enjoying the show and haven't left us a review yet, could you do me a favor? Could you take a moment, leave us some sort of written review, 5-star ranking in your podcast player of choice? It really does help the discoverability, and as I mentioned already, makes me smile. So, sweet. Well, besides that, I want to shout out and say a big thank you to all of our Herb Rally Schoolhouse members. I say it all the time. I say it every episode, but I really mean it. We really could not do Herb Rally in general, let alone the podcast, without all of the wonderful support from our Herb Rally Schoolhouse members. It's $10 a month, and if you're able to, and you're looking for a way to support what we're doing here, whether that's you check out all of our herbalism event listings, you enjoy the YouTube channel, you enjoy the podcast, consider becoming an Herb Rally Schoolhouse member. If you'd like to try your first 30 days for free, you could use coupon code podcast at checkout at herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And yeah, then you could check out what the Herb Rally Schoolhouse is. There's a lot of classes in there, herbal community discounts, private Facebook group, so on and so forth. So, and again, like I said, it's a great way to help support what we're trying to do here at Herb Rally. So big shout out again. Thank you to all of our Herb Rally Schoolhouse members. And that's going to do it for me today. This interview, by the way, is also on our YouTube channel. When we clicked publish, it was instantly a very popular video. So that means a lot of people around the herbal community really love Lise and her work. So if you do want to see the YouTube version, I will leave a link in the podcast show notes. But otherwise, enjoy it right here on the Herb Rally podcast feed. Okay, that's going to do it for me today. I'll talk to you very, very soon.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm really excited to have on Lise Wolff. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for visiting me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's our first time meeting, so I'm really excited to get to know you more. Are you from Minnesota?
No.
Okay.
I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Sheepshead Bay. Yeah.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
Very much like. And
I felt like you had some East Coast vibes to you.
Oh my God, do I ever? I know. Minnesota is a very easy place to live in once you've been a New Yorker, because it's like the living is easy here, really easy.
Well, you're still in the big town of Minneapolis. What brought you to this city specifically?
Undergraduate. I went to Macalester College.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it was so nice. People were nice. So, and it's not that New Yorkers aren't nice. It's just, it's a different, it's hard to live there, right? It's hard to survive. And here it's very easy to survive. So you then develop yourself as an herbalist, right?
Yes.
Because the expenses aren't high. And so you can organically grow instead of feeling like you have to push. And the competition, being a New Yorker, is a little bit of a different vibe. So it's kind of easy to be a little bit of a standout just for being an East Coaster.
Well,
Anyway.
we interviewed Ashley Ellenboss yesterday, and
yeah.
she's also spent a lot of time on the East Coast, and she said the same thing about the Midwest culture, and it's just so nice to be out here. So you were also saying, before we jumped on this interview, that you studied in Scotland. I would love to hear about that experience. I have Scottish roots. I'm 23%.
You look like you have Scottish roots.
23% Irish, 23% Scottish, according to my brother's
That's funny.
DNA test. So
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyways, I'd love to hear about that experience. Studying in Scotland.
Right this second. I mean, it was a master's program,
Sure.
and it was in Glasgow theoretically, but it actually kind of we would meet in different places like Majorca and stuff, and it was considered a full-time program. It was an MSc, which strangely Americans go MSc, MS. It's a master's in science, and Matt loved it. Matt Wood, who I had mentored. I had apprenticed with.
Sure.
Thought it was like the best thing ever. And so I went and did it, and I have mixed feelings about it.
Okay.
However, I did get my master's, and the thing that the master's did, which was good enough, which was it allowed me to teach in graduate programs, is actually, because it's a terminal degree, a master's within the field. And so I ended up teaching at what's called St. Catherine's. I met Bev and Claire once.
Oh, nice.
And at a conference, and she said, "Who are you?" Because I was talking about goldenrod and it turns out her program in Baltimore, right, is extremely similar to the program I taught at for 6 years in Minnesota at St. Catherine's. They had a master's in holistic health studies. So because of my master's, I was allowed to teach at the master's level. And then the University of Minnesota, I had a student who, you never know who your students are, right? And it wasn't my year-long program. It was just a little series of plant walks and making medicine. And it turns out she was very high up in the School of Nursing at the university. And she'd been watching me, and she said, "Do you want to teach at the university?" Wow. And so she said, if you get your master's, then you can teach independently of us. If not, then we'll have to co-teach with you. So I've taught at the U for 13 years.
Wow.
So yeah.
Teaching nurses.
Teaching doctorates.
Oh, wow.
Their doctorate program. And because it's the doctorate of nursing practice,
Gotcha.
The thing that's been so nice about it is they're already in the field. And I remember one of the comments, because, university, a lot of reflection about, which maybe other herb programs do, but I'm not so much a reflect on it so much as like you think about it and you work on plants, but I'm not into reflecting on what you've learned. Even though I know, I'm sorry, I'm a different kind of New Yorker. Anyway, but one of the doctor students said, "Wow, if people knew this, there would be so many less visits to the emergency room and urgent care if people could take care of themselves on, this level."
It was very heartening to hear.
It was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And now it's open to the whole university, including undergraduates. Wow. So it's nice. It's really it's been a lovely thing.
That's cool.
I really like influencing people outside of, I love my students who choose to take the class, but it's been good to influence people who they wouldn't have naturally taken an herb class.
I like that take.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we heard a little bit about your herbal education background. I'd like to hear maybe about some more of your mentors, but I'd like to take it back even further.
Yeah.
How did you get into herbalism in the first place, being a Brooklyn gal?
Yeah, this is it. So I actually grew up in the projects in Sheepshead Bay, so it was not like we didn't have a garden, we didn't have a backyard, and I had no interest in plants. I am one of the herbalists who seemed to be a little odd. I came in through the back door. I had gone to India as part of McAllister, and while I was there, my Indian mother had a goiter, and it was a very large, it looked like a second head.
Wow.
And so I was there for 5 months in their family, and she would put a poultice on, every night, like with a plastic bag over it and sleep, and nothing happened. And I came from a pretty medical family, truthfully, PhDs, MDs. And so I was like, hocus pocus, if only she'd go get a pharmaceutical, even though, again, we weren't on pharmaceuticals, but still, that's the way to go.
Sure.
And so in retrospect, I now understand what probably happened, which is either she, because again, she was using herbs. She either walked to the market, basically went to the marketplace, because this was before India was open to the West. It was a non-aligned country for a long time, so it was really isolated. And so she either walked to the marketplace, said, what would you use for this? Wasn't that effective. She saw a practitioner who wasn't that effective and kept, trying and wasn't getting there. She in the United States, the equivalent would be read it in a book and try it out, right? And so it didn't mean herbalism didn't work, but I thought, herbalism clearly did not work. And so when I came back to the United States, my education at McAllister, the one thing out of that very expensive education I would say clearly got me, well, there are two things that clearly got me, but one was if you have an opinion, a non-educated opinion, right? You have an opinion, but you don't really have a background in it, then you're prejudiced. And so I knew I was prejudiced against herbalism and holistic medicine. And I thought I was going to become a physical therapist, so I was heading in that direction. And I thought, okay, I'll take an herb class. So I am an educated person, why it doesn't work. That was really, and...
You were trying to figure out why herbal medicine doesn't work. That's literally why you took the class.
Is that crazy? I know.
Cool.
But it was Robin Rose Bennett.
Oh, wow,
she
yeah.
was such a beauty, right? She's like the sweetest energy.
She converted you.
And it really, she really did.
Just a quick break from the show to thank our presenting sponsor, Oshala Farm. Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant certified organic herb farm based in Southern Oregon, where they grow and sell over 80 different plant species. The founders, Elise and Jeff Higley, have been longtime friends, so I highly trust their growing methods and ethics. You'll love the potency and vibrancy of all the herbs they have to offer. To learn more and purchase their herbs and other organic goods, head to oshalafarm.com. So thanks once again to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. Now back to the show. Enjoy.
I would walk around New York City and all these little weeds in the sidewalks were amazing, full of medicine and food and I was just like, oh my God. And I still love teaching beginners because I'm like shaking with excitement. It's crazy to me, like how amazing the world is. And so a lot of times, like I teach classes, I walk out my front door and we start walking down the street and looking at, cracks in the sidewalk. And that's been my whole practice, is so much about the weeds. Yeah. I really like it. And her classes also, this really influenced me, which was, we would talk about one plant for an hour and a half. And so as one of my students, so again, I have this year-long program called 3 Seasons of Herbal Wisdom, and it's been in person for 26 years, and I went online last year. Okay. And one of my students said to me, yeah, I didn't, she'd heard about it for so many years and how great it was. And she finally took it and she said, and when we had a 4-hour lecture on plantain, I thought, okay. So she had no idea what it was going to be. She said, I guess this is the way it's going to be. I guess this is what class is, So it was like crazy. But so Robin, she was just so beautiful, right? Yeah. I think it's so important your first teacher be beautiful, and it's important, right? It really
I love
influences.
that.
Yeah, she's so lovely. Anyway, so yeah.
So that was probably in New York City where you took the plant walk.
Yes, totally. Yeah, it was Manhattan because she lived in in Manhattan at the time, and Central Park or something like that. And I studied with Steve Brill, who is a wild edibles guy.
Yes,
He's
I listen to Vince. Yeah.
Anyway, I love him so much. I mean,
I have to have him on the show at some point.
Yeah. I mean, he was like, I remember calling him. He's like Woody Allen, really. And I remember calling him at his house, and I mean, my students and clients call me at my house too, and he answers, "Well, man," I was like, "Oh, that's so awesome." So I mean, he's influenced me a lot too, because he was just like, it was just wild taking these plant walks, right? So anyway, I just so I love plant walks. So a lot of my programs develop with plant walks, right? Even the online stuff, I figured out how to do online plant walks and online. Really, this was interesting. So, okay, so during COVID. One of my other mentors, of course, was Matthew Wood. Of course to you, not necessarily of course to you. So during COVID, right, everything shuts down, but I was so used to teaching plant walks, as part of my year-long program, because what I would do is we'd start actually in January, and they'd learn barks and trees and bushes, and they'd make bark medicine, and then we'd watch all the plants develop. And, we'd take walks and we'd go to different areas and see plants. And so during COVID, I was like, we were only allowed to take walks, Right. And I thought, and so I called Matt's Institutes and we did a year-long plant series there. But what's interesting is the people would contact me. They'd just my private email, my work email, and they'd be like, one woman in England, another in California, there was a woman in Kentucky, and they were all like, they found, because I was like, can you really find the plants that I'm talking about, right? I'm in the Midwest. And they're like, I found every single one. Okay. Every single one. And then I'll have students who are like on a trip to the Philippines, and they're like taking photographs of all the familiar weeds that they learned in class, or, wherever, in Japan, it's like great. It's like amazing how, as it turns out, it's applicable to a lot of different places. So anyway.
We're talking like dandelion, plantain, all the above.
Creeping Charlie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So let's see if I go quickly. Like I use a lot of unusual ones because I've been isolated, I guess, in my own little world. I am not as much a book reader. And so, in fact, Matt, I got, my first non-plant ID book because Matt walked into my room that had my books. And I had said, I really don't read because he's such a reader. He was like, he thought I was joking. And he walked into my room. He said, wow, you really weren't joking. So all I had were plant ID books. Right. So he got me my first, Nicholas Culpeper. And, oh boy, I've lost my trail. What was I? Where was I?
Was asking about like the different plants that are all over the globe. Yeah.
Yeah, and so basically, if something was prolific, I would learn it in my office. Not as much from reading, a little bit of reading, but mostly I do this thing called pulse testing in practice.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
And it really fine tunes. And so if I had a new plant I was trying to learn, basically all my clients got tested on that, as well as the ones that made sense by patterns. Specific indications is what we use from the eclectics, and tissue states from Matthew Wood, although that preceded Matt by quite a few other practitioners, the physiomedicalists, and practiced with tissue states as well. But in either case, I would basically, if they tested for it, I'd look very carefully. I do what's called a proving in homeopathy, which is basically you help them do a very careful inventory of their body, and then you give them the remedy and find out where it goes. And it was fun. I mean, that's also helps people understand herbs work very quickly. You don't have to wait over several months. And it's drop doses, like Matt Wood, introduced from homeopathy. So Creeping Charlie, obviously, well, I'll go back to the barks. Oak, red osier. Dogwood has been a really, now it's a whole day long of lecture on that one. Wow. And a lot of, it's an amazing plant. I'm going to talk about that actually. I'm going to be teaching at the Good Medicine Conference.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, I got invited. Is that
the 5 herbs that are used?
Yes, that's going to have oxalis, which is, wood sorrel, red osier.
My mouth just puckered when you said that word.
Yeah, and it's an amazing plant, right?
Yeah, totally.
But as a medicinal instead of just an edible.
Yeah.
And let's see, lady's thumb, which is Polygonum persicaria, which actually its botanical Latin has changed.
It always does.
It's a relative of Japanese knotweed. Whereas everybody uses Japanese knotweed, this is a very easy to collect very common weed that people see. I've developed that quite extensively. Cool. And then I forget what the others were.
Okay.
I'm sure also when I see it, I'll be like, oh, there you go. But, false Solomon seal, that wasn't really used in medicine. Solomon seal because of Matt, but I used false. And that was, I learned that from the doctrine of signatures. And it turned out, so I use doctrine of signatures a lot. I use, of course, qualities of the plant, behavior of the plant. That's a lot of ways of learning. And then the thing that's been so much fun. Okay, so I love my students. I love my students. They're, we develop a year-long relationship, and I expect them to be smart. And they come in smart in different ways. Some people know nothing about plants, but almost it's that not knowing that makes them really good at asking questions, right? There are people who are in the medical world, people who are body workers, right? People who are acupuncturists, but they don't know plants, or people who are botany people but don't know anything else, And so it's been so interesting. I learn from them all the time. And if you give them the opportunity to think, they teach me so much. Yeah. And then and the whole goal of 3 seasons, I've always been, it's funny. It's like, so at St. Kate's, one of the heads of the program said, you really have your chip on your shoulder about academia. It's true. It's true. I really love, I'm practical. And so much of what my programs are meant to be in all my classes are meant to be practical application. Yes, thinking, but certainly thinking, but so much about discovering how to use the plants around you. And I'm not a gardener. I still can't garden. I grew up in New York. I don't know how to garden. I tried and nothing grew. And so I realized I was a wild plant person. But people can really learn, understand. I have a student in Canada now. I have a few students in Canada. And they're like, I can't find everything you're talking about. I think they can find 50% so far. Yeah. And I'm like, the whole way I'm trying to teach is that you can figure out plants that grow around you prolifically. I'm trying to teach you the steps to understand that, to be able to see and taste and feel it and work with people so that you can find out what the plants around you do as well, instead of just relying on me, to tell you what they're going to do. Yeah. Because I think if you can be a thinker, you can use them in many, many ways that it never occurred to me, and so the practical thing is, I so want people to know how to make everything, to identify it of their own accord, well, with my help, right? Because I'm an in-person, that's a really helpful way of, tasting everything. And you saw that, did you ever look at the video, on my early spring plant walk? There's a video of, it's on the sales page on my online classes. Yeah. Which is
herbalistlisewolff.com, right?
Yeah, well, that's
your main
my
website.
Main one, and then you can get to my online classes through that. But, the first thing I do is, I'm touching, I'm explaining, and then I stick it in my mouth, a nice dirty root, because that's the way to learn things.
Totally.
And so, I learn a lot from my students because they can think. Yeah. And they try, and the whole idea is to make this a practical application. They're actually using it in real life and not waiting till the end of class. The whole thing that I've explained to them is the year-long program is meant to be like Matt apprenticed me. He was there for me when I needed help, when I didn't understand or I was stuck on a case. He was there. He would talk to me. He would talk me through it. And so my online program, now the year-long in-person, which is still going on, is, of course, I'm there. How often we meet, they get me. And we often have, now we have an online network called the Mighty Network, which a lot of people have, right? That, yep. A private little thing. I say I don't do social media. Yep. I do, but it's secret. Okay. You can't find me.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
exactly.
tried.
You can't find me. That's right. It's secret. Yeah. The online version, we meet once a month, a live Zoom Q&A. So people ask questions, and it's amazing how quickly they jump to just real questions. It wasn't like, I don't understand this, because one of the students said to me, who's taken quite a few other programs, she said, you explain everything. You're very clear and thorough. So I haven't had any questions. But other people, somebody was like, I'm trying to help somebody with breast cancer. So, we're talking about breast cancer remedies during the Q&As. there's surprisingly deep conversations, and the students are trying things out. So we're discussing, how did it go? You know, what worked, what didn't. There's always like trying to learn as you go. And we're going to meet in person, you know, starting in a year. You know, there are going to be 2 opportunities to actually meet in person instead of only being online. So I know there's still yet another way. That's right. And online, there's always the ability to comment on the classes and ask questions, and then I respond very quickly. So there's, you know, as one of the students said, but there's, because she actually emails me privately, the one in Canada in particular, and she said, I said, this would be a really good thing to open up to the community, because if you have this question, I bet others do too. And she said, there's so many ways to contact you. I just don't know which one to choose. It's like, because I'm so like, so I just called her. I said, get WhatsApp and let's talk on the phone for 20 minutes and I'll answer your question. Because I love my students and I want them to succeed. I want them to use this in the real world instead of being an academic exercise. Like, well, that was interesting, you know, and move on.
For sure.
You know?
All right. So you took an herbalism class back in the day in order to prove why it wasn't. And then you converted to becoming an herbalist, essentially, through the beauty of Robin Rose Bennett and her teachings. I want to say I read now that you're a flower essence practitioner. You do drop dosing. We're not talking about poisonous plants. We're talking about getting the energetic level. So between both the drop dosage of the medicinal herbs as well as like using flower essence in your practice, how did you go from disbeliever and herbalist to full on like entering the realm of hippie dippy shit, you know, the flower essences?
I know it.
How do you explain it to, why you use flower essences, how you like got into that, and just like your whole philosophy on that.
Okay. So no,
I'm a believer. I'm not.
It's fair.
I'm just kind of very curious because it seems like a progression.
Yeah, it certainly. And you know, again, I've been practicing for almost 30 years, right? So it's a progression.
Absolutely.
And so, all right. So Robin Rose Bennett was beautiful, but it didn't mean I was going to be an herbalist, right? It just meant maybe I made a mistake. This stuff actually works, okay?
Sure.
But I was so interested in it. I mean, really, like, you find something, you just have to prioritize. And so when I moved to Minnesota and eventually found Matt, I did study with other people and stuff, but I found Matt Wood, and he said, you know, that I was meant to be an herbalist. Like, he saw something in me, which weirded me out, right? You know, because I'm like, I just took an herb class once, you know, I mean, 9 months worth of classes with Robin, but still, you know. And consequently, if he's going to be my mentor, even though we didn't say that, right? He did ask me to apprentice, but it meant he was going to be the model, right? And the model was, you know, drop doses, pulse testing, doctrine of signatures, tongues, you know, and tissue states, and, you know, so, and specific indications. So obviously that influenced me. I was still, again, I was a little weirded out, the idea that this was where I was funneling, you know, because again, I thought I was going to have a 9-to-5 job, you know, and like, I did not expect to have my own business. And, okay. And it turns out when I was trying things out on people, it actually worked. Yeah. And it kept working. And it kept working. And it was drop doses, it was little things. I would make mistakes and then discover a new plant, you know, because plants looked alike. So I'd pick the wrong one. You know, that was a very close relative, like hoary vervain instead of blue vervain. And I'd figure out how to use it. And so that's where I said, you know, my apprenticeship with Matt was kind of weird because I quickly, I couldn't garden. I was supposed to garden. I didn't know what I was doing. Then it really quickly descended into like, let's meet for dinner and talk herbs, you know? And it was like, oh, well, I saw this client and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, wow, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that, you know? And sometimes I would talk to him about the signatures because I was so much about like learning the plants by like looking at them. And, you know, like I treated pneumonia with lady's mantle because it has, and it's a garden plant, but other people grow garden plants.
Sure.
And he had a lot of it in his garden. And it has a drop of dew that sits on the leaf, right? And what is pneumonia, but, you know, a pocket of fluid in the lung that's not resolving. And, you know, I told Matt that, he's like, And I had had a case where it resolved. And he said, and he looked at me like, are you crazy? Which is hysterical. Because Matt is all about that kind of like, whoa, you know. But that was how I was figuring out the plants. And so I was of interest to him because I was figuring out things that I could teach him, even though I wasn't intending on it. It was just like trying things out, and it was actually working out. And so, okay, so drop doses is working out, you know. And again, I wasn't planning on being an herbalist. I was just very excited and taking classes. But people, you know, it was word of mouth, right? It was a very organic process. Clearly, I still haven't done social media 30 years later. It was always like people telling other people. And sometimes, by the way, if people are like, oh, what are you doing? Especially with the pulse testing, I'll say, well, why don't you feel your pulse? You know, I'll have my clients feel the pulse and their own pulse. And then I'll put bottles in their hand, like that's the flower essences. Or tinctures I'll put drops on. And they can feel changes. And they're like, wow, that's really interesting. And it helps them open their mind to the possibility that it's not all what it appears. Yeah. The other thing, you know, another influence, this is heading toward flower essences. Yeah. Is now, you're right. I really hesitated on flower essences because, you know, it was hard enough that like herbs were working at drop doses, right? But then, and I had a client who, there was another flower essence. By then, I was working at a place called Present Moment, which is an herb store that Matt also learned a lot in. And, you know, he talks about it a lot. And I learned a lot while I was there as well, you know. And one of the things that, there was a flower essence practitioner I worked in the same shifts with, Martin Bulgarin. He's local. He's very good. And I was not interested in it. And I had a client who she came to see me for some psoriasis on her knee because she had gotten flower essences and it resolved the psoriasis, but she couldn't stop crying. And she had a business she had to run. And so I was like, oh, yuck. You know, I'm not interested. I don't like drama. I want people to feel better, not worse before they feel better. I don't need to throw them into a healing crisis. And so but my family was complicated, right? I grew up in Sheepshead, and and so, you know, I had, what would we call it? You know, depression and anxiety, you know, and it just was a family trait, you know, it's enough experience. And I would dip, you know, sometimes I would get so sad, but, this is another piece of the influence. Now I'll get to it in a sec. And so I stuck my arm out because this guy could pulse us too. I said, can you find me some flower essences? And he was like, yeah, what for? I said, I don't want to tell you. And I have clients who are like, I don't want to tell you. And I figure it out by pulse. And so he found a formula for me, and it changed me so much.
It wasn't a single herb, it was a
formula? It was a little flower essence formula, 4 remedies in one bottle. That's cool. And by the time, I was such a drama queen too. And the first remedy I got within this formula, because he knew me, right? He worked with me, was for drama queens. And, you know, you know, and so I had already, you know, called my friends and said, oh, you know, I need to talk. And so when I got home from work that night, you know, I'd had my drops of flower essence, and I'd had this terrible sadness in my chest, which was gone. And that had been going on for several weeks at that point. And my friend called me and said, how are you? I said, I'm fine. Like, I felt fine. Like, I was kind of embarrassed that I'd, like, been upset about whatever this was. And it shifted me. I don't have anxiety and depression. I mean, you know, and I've gotten flower essences over the years when, you know, other stuff came up. And it was life-changing. Wow. And I thought, I have to learn this, you know, and so a further influence to back up. And why was I in the projects? You explained it to me. My father was a psychologist. And so he spent a lot of time talking to me about like understanding people, and he had his own practice. I mean, this is after the projects, right? Things develop, you know, life is complicated, but, and so to me, it always mattered how people felt, you know, like one of my questions and this is the couch where my clients sit when they first come in, inevitably makes everybody cry. And they're like, I'm so sorry, I'm crying. Is, I say, what does it feel like to be in you? And that's not a question people get asked.
Right.
And that took a long time for me to come up with that, question. But it's, because, and I don't need their whole life history anymore. They'll give me key points, great. With the flower essence, I call it troubleshooting. So I test fairly broadly because sometimes you just don't know what's buried in there. And they're so effective. Remember I talked about doing provings where people can, pay attention and you give it to them. And people can feel it. That actually what it turns out when you pulse test, I'm going to teach that. That's another class I'm teaching at the Good Medicine Confluence is pulse testing. So it turns out almost everybody, with few exceptions, you don't have to feel their pulse. If you put the bottle in their hand and they pay attention, they can feel its effect. And so a lot of clients, as I'm pulse testing, I'm like, can you feel this? I'm not telling them where do you feel it. I'm not telling them what to feel. I'm just like, can you feel it? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, my heart's beating faster. Because, you can feel it. There are 3 different pulses. It's not that complicated. Yeah. I can teach you, too. It's really, it's all very reasonable. So with the pulse, it turns out a lot of people can actually feel it. If you give them the opportunity. In fact, actually, the first time I realized people could feel it, I had a young man, and this was many years ago. This was probably 25 years ago, who I was friendly with, and he had long-term, depression, and I was like, I could probably help you. So I'm, futzing around with flower essences, and I'm taking a formula, I'm working on a formula, and I'm taking a bottle in, he said, put that back in. I said, what? And he said, put that back in. So I put it back in, he said, that makes me feel like a butterfly. I know, you laugh, but awesome. You know what? It was like I had no idea. Yeah. And that was the first person who told me they could feel it.
Yeah.
And so again,
That's
if
cool.
you give people the opportunity,
yeah.
they can tell you what they're experiencing, and it's a feedback mechanism too. Because what I do is when I'm making a formula, depending on the amount of time I have, my initial consult is a 2-hour consult because I want to make sure I hear their story, I ask the questions I need to ask, and then I have enough time to send them home with something good, that's going to, help them move forward before their follow-up, which is usually about 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
And so I have a formula, and then as the formula is finishing up, I say, can you feel the difference between this one and then, and I can put it back and that without, and they usually can feel it. And I call it the top note. It's like how they experience the remedy. As long as on the pulse, I can feel junk moving out.
It's like an aromatherapy term too, almost, isn't
it?
I think so, but.
What was the term?
Top note.
It is,
I'm pretty
you're
sure,
right,
yeah.
which I have been a little exposed to.
Okay,
right? Good point, you're right. And
Yeah.
it is. And it's the top note, it's the way they experience it. And I want to make sure they enjoy the way they experience it.
Cool.
Because sometimes it feels good to me, but it feels a little more sedate to them. And you have the option with herbs or flower essences, really. They can feel this with herbs too. It's not just flower essences. Sure. That top note of what you leave them with as they walk through their days. So anyway, pulse testing's really fun. You learn so much from it. And that's the part that's interesting too. It turns out that translates online. Like, how does that work? I mean, how can people learn that from watching videos?
But you do it.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I have a lecture, which I'm going to do at Good Medicine Confluence. Yeah. And then, just trying it out with some of the key guidelines. Oh my gosh, learning it from Matt was crazy, right? Because I love him, but he was not detailed, I was like, definitely not detailed. So it was kind of like learning. I remember, sitting in on a client I was having, it was a cancer case, and I was like very insecure, and the woman was like, you are my practitioner. She was a doctor, but I had such good results with her already, where like a big lump had like shrunk within a week, but I'm like, oh no, I'm not ready. It was like my first year of practice. And so Matt sat in with me, and he was like, I'd feel something, I'm like, that's a good one, and he'd be like, no, that's irritated. I was like, okay, that's irritated. Like, that's how I was learning pulse testing. I mean, it was like so fly by the seat of my pants. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So over the years, I've learned how to structure things so people can really you can get solid information that clearly structures a lot of these diagnostics. So anyway, including tongue diagnosis, although we're supposed to call it tongue, what's it called? Not diagnosis, we're not allowed to diagnose. Tongue evaluation.
Oh,
Yes.
I always hear the diagnostic term, but yeah, you're right. That'd probably be the better term to use.
Right,
Yeah.
I know. That was a
Legally.
new thing, right? Yeah. Anyway, so, yeah. All right. So you had wanted to ask a question about my question.
Yeah, I want to ask, yeah, exactly. Do you open your sessions with your clients with the question, what was the question that you asked them?
What
How
does
does
it
it
feel
feel like
like
to
to
be
be
you?
in you? Absolutely not. No, that's too much.
Gotcha.
Yes,
So
yes.
you ask it at some point during the session.
That
though.
first session, yeah. As it's kind of Peter, like we're not having much to say to each other.
Yeah.
It's like I don't have any particular questions to ask them. I kind of feel like I got to, after 30 years, right?
Yeah.
You can kind of read a person pretty quickly.
Totally.
And although I ask
Yeah.
physical questions,
Yeah.
I just double check a few thoughts like tragic childhood, kind of thing,
Check.
check, right? Stuff buried in you, check, right? Like, how's your, they'll be like, I'm like, do you live with anybody? Yeah, I'm married. How's that? My question, how's that going? Well, that really answers a lot of questions because people want to, it's like, well,
all connected.
But yeah, I mean, people tell me a lot of things that, people will be like, I've never told anybody this, and that's part of why it makes people cry. But no, I wait till they're used to me. If somebody's never seen me before or never seen an herbalist, which is pretty typical, right? They, I try to explain what herbalism is or that what I'm doing, because what I explain to them is, obviously I'm not a doctor.
Right.
And herbs do not act like pharmaceuticals.
Right.
This is not meant to hook you now on herbs for the rest of your life, and what, we're trying to do is nudge your body to basically resolve an issue. It's stuck in some way. It's out of balance in some way. And so what the herbs do is they remind your body how to function properly. And then my goal is to actually wean you off. And I'm sure there's something else you was going to say, but I can't remember what it was.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of like explaining to clients, that.
Sure.
The other thing I wanted to tell them is that basically a lot of what people perceive as symptoms, are basically clues to the imbalance in the body. And so I function as a detective. I especially tell children that, but it's you function as a detective and you're following their clues of what their body's, telling you, and you're trying to kind of, and that's the specific indications, right, of herbalism that comes out of the eclectics, that is to kind of, as many of the clues that point to certain herbs, right, get biased that, that's probably, an important one. Sure. But so, those clues matter. And so I do want to hear about the minutia. Doctors may not want to hear about the minutia, but I do. Yeah. And then, to me, for example, pain isn't pain. Pain has many nuances. Is it sharp shooting? Is it tingling? Is it, itchy? Is it burning? Is it, is it cramping? Is it aching? There's different nuances that all clue me into how to fine tune which remedies. And, so much to me also practice wise is that the idea that within the body it's flow. And when there's pain somewhere, it's because there's not flow in the tissue. And so your body is trying to tell you, pay attention to this, pay attention to this. And so once that flow is resolved, it goes away because it doesn't need to tell you to pay attention anymore. So, and that's with a lot of different ways I see so much about what the body does. Anyway, so.
All right.
Yeah, I know.
Very
Blah, blah, blah. So.
I have to say, it's been really cool to visit Minneapolis and see the herbal community. Like, I didn't know that the herbal community out here existed. Hanging out with you, been a pleasure.
Thank you.
You're an awesome human doing amazing work, and I love seeing the progression of your journey. It was great to hang out with Jody McKee and Jewelweed, and then Ashley Ellenboss. So I'm sure there's lots of other great herbalists. In fact, on your website, I saw friends.
Yes, yeah.
You got a whole list of different herbalists, I presume.
A lot of my students, actually, because since I was starting to teach online, I wanted to make sure there are people, people knew about the people teaching in person, because I think that's an important way to learn as well.
Oh, I couldn't
and people
agree
are hungry
more.
for it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of great. I mentioned to you earlier that I had me and a former student who was a practitioner for 18 years would host a conference, which we never told her really about.
Okay.
For 15 years, stopped at
You were doing just fine without it.
we were. And
great.
we stopped at COVID, but the goal was to actually allow a lot of all these really great, smart herbalists have a platform to teach because they were doing it.
That's cool.
And yet,
What was it called?
That was part of it. It's like that's part of it. Was like some weird long name that I still can't remember, like holistic health and herb.
Minneapolis might have been in there somewhere.
No,
Okay.
there wasn't. And everybody started just calling it Herb Fest, but we didn't
cool.
take the name Herb Fest because Frontier Herbs. Were you old enough to know about that?
It was slightly before my time, but I heard about
it.
it.
It was an herb company that was in Iowa, and
I
they
know
had
Frontier,
Herb Fest. And so they were petering down when we started, so we didn't take the name Herb Fest, but that's what everybody ultimately called it, our Herb Fest.
Totally.
And it was, so there are just so many amazing herbalists in the Twin Cities. It's really
That's so cool.
a fine thing. Yeah.
Well, awesome. I can't wait to visit again. Hang out with some of your students.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Well, why don't you, plug some other projects you got going on where they could learn more about you and everything?
Well, I actually want to plug the project slightly by asking you a question.
Please.
So your pharmacy, because I'm assuming you have a pharmacy at least that you have at home, right?
Oh, we're talking about like herbs in jars?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you harvest your own, or are you a purchaser?
Great question. So probably all the above, I would say. So Amanda has spearheaded gardening. So I was never a gardener either. So growing up in Oregon, I definitely, being taught by Howie Brownstein at the Columbine School, I was definitely like an ethical wild harvester. But also working at mountain reserves for a decade, I got a lot of free herbs. So all the above, like Oshala Farm, we just placed an order with Oshala Farm. They're also a sponsor. Shout out to Oshala Farm. Thank you for your support. But yeah, I'd say all the above. Moving to the Midwest now, I'm really excited to eventually take another herbalism apprenticeship. I've done 2 thus far, and I'm like, I really want to learn the plants around here. So I would love to get back into wild harvesting. It's just hasn't happened yet because I'm still kind of a fresh Midwesterner. But yeah, I would say I'm stoked for the garden. I'll still buy herbs from stores, But we've definitely got a pharmacy. I like that you called it that.
Well, that is, that's what it's meant to be used, right? Yeah.
And Pharmacy. See what
Very
it is there?
charming. I didn't know that one. Oh, the good.
Who would have thought of that? No, I'm sure lots of people use that.
Herbal person, right? Because, all my classes are geared toward fresh plant material.
Cool.
I don't use dried.
Nice.
And so that's part of the whole local thing.
Yep.
And so, for example, I have a class on my online teaching site called Foundations of Making Medicine, but it also says, if you can read the full line, it says from fresh plant material.
That's cool.
Because the goal is really to teach people how to make their own medicine. That's always been, my orientation is not to, I'm not a great consumer, so I don't, purchase stuff. It's
You're
like,
in good company with these herbalists.
I really always, and so as a practitioner, interestingly enough, right, it's kept the price of existing down and the profit margin quite high because it's all local plants that are freshly made. So you can make your own tinctures and medicinal oils from what is extremely common,
Totally.
and I, some of the things I think about is like water resources, right? On gardens now, it's like weeds don't really need it. And I was listening to the Good Medicine Confluence, some of your interviews.
Oh, cool.
And the woman talking, I don't remember her name, but she was talking about ecological changes as an herbalist and responding to that. And it's been
Dara Seville, I think.
Yeah,
probably,
and it's been so interesting watching transitions in Minneapolis and learning to use the plants that are transitioning, as the other ones kind of back away, has been happening within certainly my practice. Anyway, so fresh plant material, I'm all about it.
Yes.
So, but anyway, all right, that's a funny note to end on. But, I just wanted to make that point because it's really so much of the orientation of what I do.
Yeah.
So
herbalist LiseWolff.com, and that's Wolf with 2 Fs.
Yes.
And also the online platform. We'll leave links in the podcast show notes and YouTube description. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for, again,
that was great.
noticing I exist.
That's the thing. I was like, Lise was like, how'd you find out about me? And I said, I Googled Minneapolis herbalist. And there you were, right at the top of Google.
Yep.
And then lo and behold, everyone I talked to was like, oh, Lisa's great. You got to check her out. I'm like, I already am. We're going to interview her on Friday. So that was awesome.
Thank you.
Shout out to Amanda for editing and recording. Thank you so
you.
much. And
Thank you.
thanks to y'all for listening. We'll see you in the next episode of the Herbalist Hour.
Bye.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Herb Rally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at Herb Rally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from Herb Rally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.